Okay, we're gonna go ahead and get started. We appreciate you taking the time to do this. This is a big and important task for us to go over, doing this inventory and to get it done by October of next year. So thank you for taking the time. Today we're gonna go through the different components of the inventory, try to go into as much detail as possible, but there are probably gonna still be unique scenarios and questions that I hope that you ask as we go along. For those online, you can definitely ask through the chat. We do have Emily Young working on answering some of those if they're pretty easy questions to answer, but we may save a few for asking aloud to everybody so everyone can hear that. So we'll go ahead and get started. Today we do have a few people from the FMT group on our side anyway, from TRWA. Myself, Jason Knobloch. We also have Elston Johnson. Philip Givens is out front, and we have Emily Young. We're all going to be part of trying to put this presentation together for you today. In attendance, we also have various people from TCEQ, so when the hard questions come, that's what they're there for. So definitely raise your hand, cut us off, ask questions as we go along. So we want this to be a workshop so we can make this more of a communication style rather than just a presentation. So. This workshop is put on by the FMT program, which is Financial, Managerial, and Technical Assistance. This was initiated under the Safe Drinking Water Act back in 1996 as a way to develop capacity development. So I believe each state has to formulate some way to accomplish this, and TCEQ did it through this FMT program. We do various technical assistance assignments, we do on-site training through various modules, and then we do workshops such as this. So that is who's putting this on, is TCEQ. Trying to give you the tools and the information you need to be able to complete this and complete it efficiently. So as we go through this, we're going to be mentioning the FMT program a couple times because you can request for on-site assistance. So we go through this and you still have follow-up questions, or you would like to have someone come out and visit with you at your system to go through some of this. There's some information at the very end, contacts to reach out to the FMT department and ask for one of us to come out. Okay. Today this is the pretty loose agenda, but we should be going from about 8 to 12 o'clock. We're going to go over the 4 sections, an overview of LCRR with a little bit of LCRI, the improvements. We're going to walk through the template, each section of that to try to explain what is needed on each component or tab of that Excel sheet. We're going to go through the different methods of trying to gather this information, and then at the end we're going to go through some resources and some funding information. So we're going to be breaking this up for different speakers. Without any further hesitation, we'll have Elston Johnson to go over the LCRR overview.
Right. Thank you, Jason. So I'm going to take some time to go through the actual overview of the rule requirements for the LCRR and mention a little bit of LCRI. We'll talk about that when we get to it. It hasn't been released yet. But what we want to do is give a little background about the lead and copper rule revisions, and then talk about EPA's intent to strengthen the current lead and copper rule, and then go through an overview and the next steps. And again, as Jason said, ask questions throughout. We want this to be very interactive. We want to make sure you get the information you need. All right, so the lead and copper rule. So the lead and copper rule was originally published by EPA in 1991. And as we all know, health concerns with lead has been something that's been an issue for years. Human exposure to lead causes a number of health effects, most notably delayed development, mostly in infant and children, when it comes to the mental capacity. There's also some health effects that can impact adults as well, things like cardiovascular impacts, things like that. And so because of the number of routes of exposure, I know a lot of people are probably familiar with exposure through paint as well as dust, but water has a significant, drinking water especially, has a significant exposure rate. Some of the studies have put out that it's approximately 20% of exposure from lead has come from drinking water in adults. Is even higher for infants and younger children. So EPA put this rule out in 1991 to try to get those exposure rates down. It's a treatment technique-based regulation, and what that means is once you hit a level, and the LCRR is an action level, well then there's activities that you need to do to try to get that exposure down and get those levels of lead down. All right, and one of the most notable ways we do that currently, and still with the revision, is the corrosion treatment. So applying chemicals and treatment to slow down the rate of corrosion of lead out of pipes when interacts with water. To strengthen the LCR and the revisions, the goal is to proactively remove lead service lines and more equitably protect public health. And so in doing that, the lead and copper rule revisions are effective now. They were put out in 2021. EPA is working on improvements. And so they're currently under development. My understanding it'll be released maybe the summer or the fall. What kind of changes they would make to the current LCR to even make it even more protective. So we'll wait and see what comes up with those. And so to strengthen the LCR, to better protect children and communities. So there's 3 goals that you see listed here for the rule. And number 1 is to get the lead out and actively, effectively remove lead, which is the most effective way to address and prevent exposure to lead, is to literally get rid of it. And so that's one of the goals here. Second is to empower communities, really provide them more information, more education on how to reduce their lead exposure. And then better protect children. This adds a component of testing of lead specifically in schools, which hadn't been in place in the current rule, other than if the school itself was a water system. So we'll walk through these goals here. So, goal 1, placing more lead service lines. So the LCRR defines a lead service line as a portion of pipe that is made of lead which connects the water main to the building inlet. And so basically it's the line from the main to whatever structure it's being served by the water system. It is typically owned by the water system on one side and the property owner on the other side. So that makes things a little complicated, so we'll talk through that. Also, galvanized service lines are considered lead service line if they ever were or currently are downstream of a lead service line, or downstream of material, a main of unknown material. So if you don't know what the service line is made of, then you have to assume right off the bat that it could possibly be lead and you do more investigation. And we'll talk through that more as we walk through specifically the inventory. Now there's been a lot of discussion about the connectors, the goosenecks, the pigtails. They don't count as lead service lines in the final rule that was put out. They are something to definitely pay attention to. And as we walk through the inventory, you'll see that they need to be identified, and when they're found, they do need to be removed, but they do not count as a lead service line. So once they go through the specifics of the template and the inventory, they'll discuss that in more detail. Then a galvanized service line alone is not considered a lead service line either. As I mentioned earlier, it has to have been downstream of a lead service line or a line of unknown material. Here's a graphic that describes a typical PWS service line. And you see here that you have from the water main, you have up to the meter box, and then from the meter box on at the property line, you go into the house, and that's what's considered the service line. And so below, it shows you what's considered PWS responsibility, public side, and the owner's responsibility, private side. And again, when it comes to getting that replaced, that can make things a little complicated. And so both parties have to work together to get that service line replaced when it is lead. So this graphic just highlights when there's a gooseneck in place or a connector from the corporation stop off the water main to the service line and into the house. And in this scenario, if that gooseneck is lead and the service line is PVC, then this is not considered a lead service line. So that's why the green check mark's there. Now in this scenario, it's showing that with the connection there, the gooseneck connection, if it happens to be lead, that line is listed as being a poly line from the connector to the meter box, to the curb stop. And then from there, it's a galvanized service line. And remember, we mentioned earlier that for a galvanized service line to be considered a lead service line that needs replacement, it needs to be downstream of a lead service line, not a gooseneck. And so this scenario would not be considered a lead service line. So we put this in here just because there was a lot of talk about when the rule was being developed, and even after it initially came out, how do goosenecks, how do pigtails, how do these lead connectors play into service lines and the replacement requirements? So in this scenario, this would not be considered a lead service line. All right, sure.
In that scenario, does the pigtail have to be replaced because it's lead, or do you let that allowed to stay?
My understanding, and Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, if you identify a gooseneck that's lead, you should replace it, the connector itself, but not the service line. Yes, sir. So continuing on with goal 1, this is the federal rule citation of who needs to develop a lead service line inventory. And it's all water systems. It's all water systems in the sense that all community water systems and non-transit, non-community water systems have to develop an inventory of their service lines. And the idea behind it is to identify those that are lead that need replacement. And it also includes service line regardless of ownership status. So in other words, as we saw in the graphic earlier, you have the public side and private side, the water system owned side and the homeowner owned side of the service line. They both need to be inventoried, and you'll see that the template is set up that way to address that. And so as I mentioned, community, non-community, all community and non-transit, non-community water systems are required to develop the service line inventory. And there's a due date. Just in case you're not aware, I think most people know that, but just in case, put it in red here, October 16, 2024. And that needs to be, your initial lead service inventory needs to be submitted on that date. Now, after that, updates will be based on, as it mentions here, your current tap sampling schedule. Either if you're on annual schedule or triannual schedule, you'll coordinate that with a TCEQ, but that is when your lead service line inventory needs to be, or your service line inventory needs to be updated after the initial one on October 16th, 2024. So, key to this is don't wait. As you'll see as we go through today, there's a lot of information that needs to be evaluated in this initial inventory. A lot of records that are required to be evaluated to put this inventory together. And so the sooner you start, the better. It'll give you an opportunity to do a really good, thorough review of your records. And also, if you need additional assistance, you'll know that and you'll have time to get that assistance. So you want to make sure you jump on this and get going on if you haven't already. Okay. And continuing on with the laid out goal 1, there's some additional changes in the rule having to do with sampling. So in the current rule, you have to sample based on, you do your TAMP samples based on the tier system, based on the structures and material service lines and the structures in your service area. So the rule made some revisions to that. It's more focused now on tiers that are associated with when you identify those lead service lines, that you do your tap samples there, that you make those your samples, so your sample sites. New tap sampling procedure. So as the graphic shows here, instead of just doing the first draw, you now are doing the 5th liter draw. So basically, as it shows you, the first draw of water is taken. My understanding is that will be sample for copper, and then you draw 4 more, and that 5th one will be sampled for lead. And the idea behind that is to get what's representative in the service line, not necessarily the interior plumbing of the house. Because again, we want to see if the service line itself is providing the source of lead. Systems with higher levels will sample more frequently, so the sampling schedule, tap sampling schedule, will be adjusted if you have action level exceedances for lead. Just like it is in the current rule, you'll have to sample more if you have lead hits in your tap samples. What's different is that now that there is a triggering action level exceedance. Before we had just the action level exceedance, but now there's a trigger to start doing some different assessments and other activities, and that is at 10 parts per billion. The current action level still is in fact of 15 parts per billion, but this is now a trigger level at 10 parts, so 5 parts below, to start doing additional assessment activities if you hit that trigger when you're doing your tap samples. And that's what you'll hear the term find and fix approach. Again, as I said, that's going and doing some additional sampling as an example of assessing that site, that tap, to see if there's any way you can determine if there's lead from the service line or any other exposure point. There is some flexibility for small systems if they do hit that trigger. There's the use of POU, point of use devices. There is opportunity for additional sampling. There's other things you can do if you're a smaller system, but the idea behind this is when you hit that trigger, you start addressing lead sooner at a lower level to hopefully that you can find out and identify the actual source of lead, and then it can be removed. Okay, so then goal 2, empowering communities. And so this is where we're gonna have the opportunity for the homeowners to learn more about the elevated levels of lead in their home and the system a lot sooner. So here's the rule citation for an action level exceedance. So when that occurs, then you have to notify the public with no later than 24 hours when there is a when your water system has an action level exceedance. The water system also has to notify homeowners and the building owners about the opportunities to replace lead service lines, information of not only of financial assistance, but ways for them to reduce their exposure to lead as well. And again, that action level is 15 parts per billion. Also, additional information needs to now go into your Consumer Confidence Report, or your CCR. The mandatory health effects language that's listed in the rule and information in your lead service line replacement program, that needs to be in your CCR now. If you have identified lead service lines in your inventory, those customers now need to be notified about those lead service lines on an annual basis. And if you have any inquiries about lead service lines, once your inventory is made available to your customers, you have to respond to those information requests as well. If you have a population over 50,000, your lead service line inventory must be available online to your customers. And then under 50,000, that's when you provide it when requested. And then you have to deliver notice and public education material to your customers that lists out your lead service line. When you're doing any kind of work, lead service line replacement work, or any work that could disturb that lead service line, you must notify those customers right away and provide that additional public education about reducing their exposure to lead. All right. So, goal 3, and this is better protect children. So this is also something new with the LCRR, is targeted sampling at schools and child care facilities. And the idea behind it is children are at the most risk of the health impacts of lead exposure. And so we want to get more information by sampling and evaluating those taps at those places where they spend the most time, which is at schools and at child care facilities. The LCR defines, as you can see here, the child care facilities. The those that are licensed by their state or local agency. Schools include not only just public schools, but private schools, charter schools, elementary and secondary students. And then elementary school is defined specifically up to 8th grade because the requirement is to sample at child care facilities and elementary schools. This next slide talks about that. Yeah, so the idea is that your community water systems have to sample 20% of their licensed child care facilities as well as the elementary schools. And that is going to the schools, helping them identify taps or not taps, but faucets where there's human consumption of water and where there's opportunity for exposure of the students to lead, water-containing lead. And so you go ahead and help them do that, help them with the sampling techniques, and you have to sample 20% or within a 5-year period, all of the schools, elementary schools, and childcare facilities within your service area. For secondary schools, you have to offer it to them. You don't have to sample those, but you do have to make the effort to offer it to them and also let them know about the potential health impacts of lead exposure, even for children in secondary schools. And again, that's in schools above 8th grade. The one caveat here you can see is that it does exclude any facilities, any schools that are, or child care facilities that the building has been constructed after 2014. That's based on the national lead ban for building materials containing lead. So you can rule out those that were constructed after 2014. And again, this is because the health effects of lead are more impactful on children. And so they want to make sure they get as much information and an idea of their exposure at the facilities they spend the most time at. And also listed here, as you see, is that testing at the schools are not part of your normal lead and copper tap sampling, including your population. This is over and above, separate from that. So with that, there is currently an opportunity to utilize funds for your schools in your systems to do voluntary program testing right now. And this program actually provides grant money and technical assistance to help your schools identify those areas that they need to sample, put together a sampling plan, even a plan for replacement if necessary. They'll do the sampling, pay for the analysis, and provide you technical assistance and get your school's technical assistance to getting it done, getting the sampling done. And so this program is for your schools to sign up, not necessarily for the water systems, but you could tell your schools about it. And so it's, you can see the email address here is info@txleadtesting.org, or the phone number listed here. You can contact them or go to the website. And really, you should direct your schools to this, because this is an opportunity to get a jump start on the testing requirement for your schools and have your schools get some not only funding help, but technical assistance help with it. My understanding is a number of schools in the state that have already taken advantage of this, and the program is continuing, so you might as well look into it, and it'll help you again get a jump on the requirement for testing your schools in your service area. All right, so next steps. What do we do next? Well, right now you continue to comply with the current lead and copper rule that was codified in July of 2020. And then the compliance date for the revision is October 16, 2024. So that's when that initial inventory for your lead service lines are due. So you must have it done by that date and have that submitted in the TCEQ. Once EPA puts out the lead and copper rule improvements, then we'll see what, if any, changes to that. The lead service line inventory, my understanding, that will not change. That is still going to be required, but there may be other changes into other parts of the rule. So hopefully that'll be out fairly soon, so we can see what will be required, so that we can comply with that October 16th, 2024 deadline. And here is just a timeline that shows you how the lead and copper rule revisions were put together and published. And so initially January 15th of 2021 is when the final rule was initially published, and then there was a executive order to do a review of the rule, and so that happened. Got a lot of additional public input, which is why we're doing the LCRI at this point. And so the rule was published without the changes, but that the LCRI will incorporate some of those changes from the public comment. And again, the expectation is that'll be out sometime this summer, maybe slip into the fall, of what those changes are going to be, and then it'll be published summer 2024, and then we still have that compliance due date of October 16. So, what do we do now? As I mentioned earlier, continue to comply with your current LCR rules, read the revisions that are out there online, and EPA has put out a guidance. You have the lead service line inventory guidance from EPA, and start working on the inventory. And then be proactive as you can. Get ahead of getting the lead service line placement done, getting a program in place. There's a lot of funding available. We're going to hear about that a little bit later today, and take advantage of all these things, and also continue with corrosion control, evaluate if you need to do corrosion control in your system. His whole idea behind this, again, is to just lessen the exposure to lead and ultimately replace and completely reduce that exposure to your customers. And here's a few additional resources. EPA website. EPA has a lot of information on their website about the lead and copper rule revisions, as well as the current rule. There's a lot of good guidance on everything, not only for the inventory and the replacement, but funding and just information for the public, for your customers on lead exposure, how to reduce it, the impacts, the health impacts. Everything you want to know is there, as well as on the TCEQ website, which we'll go through later today. And then just reading the actual idea behind this gives you some good background of why EPA did what they did with revising the rule. So with that, are there any questions on the lead and copper rule revisions specifically?
Good morning, Nelson. Hector Alanis from Bluff Municipal Utility District here in Round Rock. Regarding CCR, the mandatory language, will there be some language that is mandated for that CCR, and when should it start?
Okay, so the question was considered here is there mandated language for the CCR, and will that be put out? And I'm going to start, but I'm probably defer this question to make sure I get it right. That there's the mandatory language is listed in the current rule, but I don't know if TCU is going to put out a template or, okay, normally TCU puts out a template. That language will be in that template, CCR, so you can incorporate into what you put together for your CCR.
Elson?
Yes.
So we have some online questions.
Okay.
Does the revision apply to wholesale systems and any mains that may transfer to plant for treatment?
So does it apply to wholesale systems and transmission lines? Is that what you're asking?
Does the revision apply to wholesale systems and any mains that may transfer to plant for treatment?
Okay. I believe the inventory requirement is specific for service lines. Is that right? Would it apply to a wholesaler?
So we're requiring wholesale systems to submit an inventory just to certify that there are no service lines. But like under the current LCR, wholesale systems are not required to sample.
They may have mentioned at the beginning, will the recording be sent to those registered?
I believe it will.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, it's going to be uploaded on the YouTube webpage,
Okay.
a TCEQ webpage. And there was one more question. It is difficult to get homeowners to take the first liter sample correctly. How do we expect non-trained people to correctly sample this for us using the first and fifth liter samples?
We'll go ahead and let Lily answer that.
Yeah, so, sampling protocols could be changed under LCRI, so we are not sure of the sampling protocols at this point. But if, that fifth liter is required, it's just about working with that consumer, with that customer, making sure that those samples are accurately collected.
About SOPs?
Yeah.
Having proper SOPs, I think, helps as well.
Yeah. Okay, with that, then we're going to walk through the actual template, and I'm going to turn that over to Mr. Phillip Gibbons, and he will take it from here.